General Hospital spoilers reveal that Cullum's ultimatum hit Brennan like a blade pressed quietly, deliberately against the throat. No blood drawn, but the threat unmistakable. For weeks, Brennan had operated under the illusion that he could shield Jocelyn from the darker machinery of the WSB, that her file sealed in a private compartment and her status listed as off-grid would be enough to keep her invisible to men like Ross Cullum. But invisibility was never truly possible inside an organization built on secrets. And now that Cullum had made direct contact with Jocelyn at Windermere, the illusion shattered. Cullum did not raise his voice, did not flash the cold fury he was known for. Instead, he delivered his ultimatum with unsettling calm. An administrative request presented as a matter of operational necessity. Jocelyn, according to Cullum, was a liability. She had lied to a superior officer. She had breached protocol. She had inserted herself into a situation far beyond her clearance. That alone should have been enough to remove her from active duty. But the truth beneath Cullum's measured tone was far more sinister. He wanted Jocelyn gone, erased from the WSB before she ever had the chance to uncover what he and Sidwell were truly orchestrating. And Brennan knew it. Brennan felt the walls tighten around him as Cullum spoke. The ultimatum was not a suggestion. It was a demand disguised in velvet, wrapped in bureaucratic language but sharpened by threat. Either Brennan terminated Jocelyn's position, or Cullum would intervene personally. An intervention Brennan knew would not end with paperwork, but with something far more permanent. Brennan had survived too long in the WSB not to recognize the ghost of death when it brushed past him. This wasn't just about discipline. It was about containment. It was about silencing a young agent who knew too much and trusted the wrong mentor. Brennan tried to reason with Cullum, emphasizing Jocelyn's potential, her intelligence, her promise as a recruit. But Cullum had already dismissed those qualities as weaknesses. To him, Jocelyn's defiance did not demonstrate courage. It demonstrated recklessness. Her instincts, sharpened by desperation rather than discipline, made her unpredictable. And unpredictability within the WSB was a flaw punishable by removal. Cullum's eyes held no malice, only calculation. That was what terrified Brennan the most. A man who kills out of rage can be negotiated with. A man who kills out of strategy cannot. Brennan left the meeting with his pulse thundering, the air around him feeling thinner than before. The ultimatum replayed in his mind on an endless loop, each word embedding deeper until it felt like a brand searing his conscience. If he obeyed, he would destroy the young woman he had sworn quietly to protect. If he refused, he risked drawing Cullum's attention not only onto Jocelyn, but onto himself. And Brennan knew exactly what happened to agents who stood in Cullum's way. They disappeared, not metaphorically, not administratively, physically, permanently. The pressure became a living thing inside Brennan, twisting, clawing, tightening each day as Jocelyn unknowingly drifted closer to danger. She continued to investigate, continued to push boundaries, continued to prove Cullum's suspicions right. Every step she took toward the truth brought Cullum one step closer to enforcing his ultimatum. Brennan felt himself trapped in a tightening vice, one that demanded he choose between loyalty to the Bureau and loyalty to the one person who still believed he had a soul left to save. The irony tasted bitter. For years, Brennan had operated in moral gray zones without hesitation, sacrificing assets when necessary, cutting ties without remorse. But Jocelyn was different. She reminded him of the agent he once thought he could become. Before WSB corrupted him from the inside out, she was hope in a place that had long since forgotten the concept. And now Cullum wanted that hope extinguished. The psychological torment of the ultimatum began to affect Brennan's judgment. He found himself watching Jocelyn too closely, analyzing her every move, calculating how each action might provoke Cullum further. Fear wrapped around every decision he made. Conversations with her became strained, shadowed by guilt he couldn't reveal and dread he couldn't suppress. Jocelyn noticed the shift, but misinterpreted it as frustration rather than terror. She believed Brennan doubted her abilities. She didn't realize he feared losing her entirely. And still, Brennan hesitated. Every day he postponed the inevitable was another day he gambled with her life. Cullum did not issue warnings twice. His patience was thin, his reach vast, and his style lethal. Brennan had seen him dismantle agents more skilled than Jocelyn, men who believed they were untouchable, until the moment Cullum ended them with bureaucratic precision and cold efficiency. Brennan's nightmares became haunted by the image of Jocelyn collapsing, unprotected, eliminated by a man who saw her as nothing more than a loose end. The guilt became suffocating. Brennan could already feel the WSB obituary forming in Cullum's tone. Agent terminated for operational misconduct. Clean, clinical, erased. That was when Brennan realized the true horror of the ultimatum. It wasn't just about firing Jocelyn. It was about forcing Brennan to become the instrument of her destruction. Cullum wanted Brennan to carry the stain, to fracture himself in a way that would ensure he never crossed the line of morality again. Breaking Brennan was the hidden purpose. Breaking Jocelyn was merely the method. The pressure mounted until Brennan felt something inside him begin to crack, and in that fracture, a darker possibility emerged, one far more dangerous than Cullum anticipated. If Brennan chose to defy Cullum, to protect Jocelyn instead of sacrificing her, he would be declaring open war inside the WSB, a war that could consume them both, a war Cullum would not allow him to survive. Yet the thought of destroying Jocelyn, of signing her execution, under the guise of dismissal, was something Brennan could not bring himself to do. And so he stood on the precipice of the WSB's deadliest crossroads, his loyalty torn, his morality bleeding, his every choice leading toward catastrophe. Cullum believed his ultimatum would force Brennan into compliance. What he didn't realize was that it might instead push Brennan into rebellion. And rebellion, inside the WSB, is not a choice. It is a death sentence, one that could ignite a disaster no one is prepared to contain. Cullum could have ended the entire situation with a simple report, a quiet note in the WSB system claiming he had investigated Windermere during the blackout and encountered nothing more threatening than a confused caretaker. Yet the truth was far more sinister. He no longer needed verification evidence or protocol to justify his next move. He had already decided Jocelyn's career needed to end, and he intended to ensure it happened with ruthless precision. The moment he watched her bluff, hesitate, and lie to his face, he knew she was a liability, one who had learned far too much and had stepped onto ground far too dangerous for someone as inexperienced as her. His warning to Brennan would not be a suggestion, but an ultimatum, sharpened with the kind of threat only a WSB director could deliver. Fire her now, or watch the consequences ripple outward in ways impossible to contain. Brennan, who was already suffocating beneath the weight of secrets, internal investigations, and the invisible chains linking him to Sidwell's legacy, realized almost instantly that Cullum had cornered him. The agency was shifting, the pressure tightening, and one wrong move could shatter everything. Compliance seemed inevitable, not because Brennan wanted to sacrifice Jocelyn, but because the alternative meant risking internal exposure, career destruction, and possibly even death. For the first time, Brennan understood that Cullum was not merely protecting WSB interests. He was protecting something inside himself, something dangerous, panicked, and spiraling into paranoia. Yet firing Jocelyn would not resolve anything. It would only ignite the fuse. When Jocelyn eventually received the news, delivered perhaps with Brennan's forced calm, or maybe in a cold, formal message from the WSB board, she would feel the blow like a betrayal, slicing straight through her chest. Her guilt, rage, and disbelief would merge into a single burning instinct. Find out why. And there was only one person she trusted enough to seek answers from: Anna. Her path to Anna would be frantic, emotional, and charged with the kind of desperation that marks the beginning of a much larger war. Because the moment Jocelyn reached Anna and confessed that Cullum had lied, had threatened, had forced Brennan into a corner, she would unknowingly open a door that could not be closed again. Anna, with her experience of WSB corruption, would immediately sense what Jocelyn could not. Cullum was not just issuing administrative orders, he was unraveling. He was becoming reckless, volatile, and increasingly aware that Jocelyn represented the first crack in the shield, protecting his position. Cullum himself would feel that shift like a pulse of static running through his spine. The more he tried to silence threats, the more exposed he felt. His power, once absolute, now seemed fragile, slipping from his grasp as whispers circulated. As files shifted hands, as Jocelyn's name resurfaced in conversations he could not control, his desperation would begin to mutate into something darker: obsession. He would picture Jocelyn as a ticking bomb, a threat programmed to detonate at the worst possible moment. And Brennan, caught in the crossfire, would sense the danger closing in from every direction. He would realize that Cullum was no longer acting as a calculated WSB director, but as a man drowning in his own fear of exposure. Every choice Brennan made, every word he spoke to Jocelyn, every lie he told to protect her would tighten the noose around him. Meanwhile, Jocelyn, instead of retreating, would transform her humiliation into determination. Losing her WSB position would not break her. It would harden her. She would dig deeper into the agency's secrets, into Cullum's past operations, into the strange inconsistencies surrounding Windermere, Spoon Island, and the Five Poppies massacre. And the deeper she dug, the more she would uncover signs of a conspiracy that reached far beyond Sidwell. A conspiracy Cullum might be at the center of. Every discovery she made would raise the stakes. Every answer would lead to a darker question: what is Cullum hiding? And how far will he go to keep her quiet? This is where the disaster begins to take shape, not in a gunfight, not in a public scandal, but in the silent, psychological war now forming between Cullum and Jocelyn. He is unraveling faster, his temper thinning, his paranoia sharpening. She is growing braver, more reckless, more determined to expose the truth. Brennan stands trapped between them, terrified that whichever side he chooses will destroy him. The entire WSB begins to vibrate with tension, with suspicion, with the quiet dread that something catastrophic is brewing beneath the surface. And Anna, watching from the shadows, realizes the truth before anyone else. This is not a conflict that ends with a firing. It ends with a collapse, a betrayal, a revelation powerful enough to shake the WSB to its core. Cullum's ultimatum may have been the first strike, but the real explosion is still coming, because Jocelyn has stopped being a threat he can control. She has become a force determined to expose him. And Cullum, unable to contain the cracks spreading through his carefully constructed world, is becoming the most dangerous version of himself. What happens next will reshape them all. Brennan never imagined the moment would come when the two people he trusted most, Carly and Cullum, would stand on opposite sides of him, not as allies but as predators tightening a trap he never saw forming. And yet the reality unfolded with a cruelty that felt almost surgical. Carly, who once looked at him with a quiet gratitude and a fragile hope for redemption, now moved like someone driven by fear, by instinct, by the dawning awareness that Brennan's secrets were not simply dangerous, they were catastrophic. Meanwhile, Cullum, the man Brennan had protected, covered for, defended even when logic warned him not to, had shifted into a creature Brennan barely recognized. A shadow wearing authority like armor. A man whose thirst for control had sharpened into something far more volatile. The betrayal did not come loudly. It arrived in whispers, in private conversations Brennan was never meant to hear, in glances exchanged between Carly and Cullum that carved open a silent truth. They were planning something that required him to fall. And Brennan, who had spent years surviving political storms and covert wars, felt for the first time like a man standing unarmed in front of his executioners. Carly's betrayal was the deepest cut, because she moved not with hatred, but with resignation, as if she regretted every step yet took it anyway. She had discovered something about Windermere, about the sealed files, about Jocelyn's danger that forced her to view Brennan not as a flawed protector, but as a ticking threat. Cullum, on the other hand, betrayed him with ease, no guilt, no hesitation, no humanity left to soften the blow. Brennan had become inconvenient, a liability, a loose end that needed trimming before the wrong eyes noticed how deep the rot inside the WSB had spread. Between them, Brennan found himself trapped in a tightening vice, Carly pushing for the truth, Cullum pushing for silence, and he standing in the suffocating middle, where truth and survival no longer aligned. The plan against him grew like a storm cloud. First a conversation leaked, then an order quietly rescinded, then a meeting removed from his schedule without explanation, and Brennan felt the ground beneath him shifting grain by grain. Cullum had begun constructing a narrative to destroy him, reports altered, mission logs rewritten. Subtle accusations seeded throughout the agency, painting Brennan as unstable, compromised, dangerous even. Carly, unknowingly or not, fed into this collapse by investigating him, confronting him, forcing him into defensive lies that only made him look guiltier. Brennan realized too late that every attempt to protect Jocelyn had been twisted into evidence against him. Every warning he gave Carly now looked like manipulation. Every choice he made to shield his agents was now recast as obstruction. And the worst part, the part that pierced him deeper than any operational failure, was the moment he realized Carly no longer looked at him with trust, not even with fear, but with certainty. Certainty that he was part of something corrupted beyond saving. The certainty that he had crossed a line he could never step back from. Her eyes told him she had chosen her side, and it wasn't his. Cullum's attack was more brutal in its precision. He wasn't satisfied with breaking Brennan professionally. He wanted him erased. Files vanished. Communications were intercepted. Brennan's clearance was flagged for internal review, a death sentence for anyone in his rank. Contacts he had mentored, agents he had protected, began pulling away, afraid of associating with him. Brennan could feel his world collapsing inward, the agency turning cold, sterile, unfamiliar, like a body rejecting one of its own organs. Cullum orchestrated it with a surgeon's calm, carving away Brennan's influence, his allies, his logic, until all that remained was a man staring into the abyss of what used to be his identity. In the shadows of this betrayal, Brennan began to understand the true horror of his situation. He had no allies left. Carly had become a moral weapon. Cullum had become an executioner. Jocelyn would never trust him again. And the WSB, the system he had devoted his life to, would not save him from a narrative stronger than truth. Brennan could feel something breaking inside him, the part of his mind that once believed he could fix everything, repair everything, protect everyone. Now he stood on the edge of something darker, a future that looked nothing like the life he had built. The disaster looming over him was not a single explosive moment, but a slow, crushing descent, a dismantling of his identity, his power, his purpose. For the first time in his career, Brennan feared not for the agency, not for the mission, but for himself. And in that fear, he understood the final truth. Carly and Cullum were not just planning to remove him. They were planning to erase him. And the darkness gathering around him was only the beginning of a far greater downfall. He could no longer outrun,